Okay, we are live.
Okay, good. Okay, thank you. Well, I'd like to call the meeting to order at 9:02 a.m. And I'd like to welcome everyone to the meeting today. And let's start off with the approval of the minutes.
Actually, let's do a roll call, please.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you, Eric.
Member Skelton,
Here.
Mayor Hepburn,
Here.
Vice Chair Carter,
Present.
and Supervisor Barger is absent this morning. Thank you.
Okay. Now we will approve the minutes. Do I have a motion?
Motion to approve. Second.
Thank you, Ray. All those in favor, do you need to take a vote or can we raise our right hand?
Please, we'll do a vote, roll call vote, please.
Okay,
Member Skelton,
Approve.
Mayor Hepburn,
Yes, approve.
and Vice Chair Carter.
yes.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move to the declaration of emergency. And that is so that we can continue with our Zoom meetings, teleconferencing. So we do need to have a motion in a second to approve and move forward with continuing with the teleconferencing.
Motion to approve. Second.
Okay, take the vote. Eric?
Yes, Mayor, Member Skelton, please.
Approve.
And Mayor Hepburn,
Yes.
and Vice Chair Carter.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, item 4, update on financial approaches for priority projects of EIFD.
Yes, thank you. I will take this item. So you know, there is our list of consultants that have been helping us with this, who are from Cosmont. So I will be doing the presentation. Oh, and then Peter has joined us. Thank you. Hello, Peter. Oh, wait for his audio to jump in. Maybe. Well, we'll let him get up to speed. Just a little precursor, as the board may remember, we have over the last year or so kind of providing updates on the priority projects, as well as how we want to go about financing this next level of projects that have been identified in the PFA. Over the last 9 months or so, we've been looking at alternatives, evaluating with our city engineer on some of the costs of the preferred projects are primarily the connectivity from E Street to 2nd and into the Old Town area and the university as well. What we have done is now put together a little bit more detail that we want to bring forward to the board, as well as then bring it forward to the council so that we can begin the process of a bond issuance. But before we did that, we wanted everybody to understand kind of where we were at, what we were looking at, the mechanics of how we were going to get there, and how the city was going to get repaid by the PFA. So this presentation will go over that. There is no action that is required by the board. It's just mostly to answer questions at this point. So before I get started, any questions in the onset?
No.
Okay. All right. So as I said, we'll be updating you on the financing plan, current estimates, what the next steps of obtaining funding, because as you'll see, there's several steps that will need to be taken to put these in place. And then we will provide an overview of the mechanics for your consideration. To be clear, there are going to be, we have our board counsel, which is Peter Wallen, but we will also be engaging a bond counsel that is Danny Kim, that will be handling the processing of the bond and making sure everything on that end is done appropriately. And with that, go to the next slide. as we had mentioned, in addition to the pedestrian bridge, which has taken on its own life and has its own funding pieces that we are working on primarily outside of the EIFD, outside funding between grants, earmarks, and other available fundings to do that work. The other priority projects that we identified with the PFA about a year or so ago was this stretch right here that's delineated in the blue. And we believe that these are priority projects that are important to get done in advance of the gold line being operational, as well as any of the development, because we wanted to create that connectivity and that movement, encouraging that movement into our Old Town area and the university. So with that, we have begun the preliminary work to determine what needs to be done in order to improve that area. And I'm going to let Eric kind of walk through some of those specifics and then some of the rough estimates of what the costs are for that.
Yeah, so as outlined on the right side of the screen, there's several different improvements that we hope to do in these two segments of the street. And there's a lack of street lighting here today. And so we will be installing new street lights where they don't exist today. These will mimic the historic acorn type lighting that we have in Old Town Laverne now. All of the trees, almost all of the trees will be removed with a new palette by our landscape architect that's designed a palette of two different types of trees to intermix, both on East Street and Second Street, because we wanted this consistent design to where when you get off the train, if you're not familiar with Laverne, it's basically the path that you know that you're going to follow because it's the same design. Sidewalks are the same design. It's a consistent tree pattern, lighting, et cetera, to make it safe. The sidewalk will be expanded to the edge of our right of ways, but we will keep the parkway in between the curb and the sidewalk. In most places, we're going to be able to expand the sidewalk about 2 feet wider than what it is today. We'll replace all the existing concrete as well, so it'll all be fresh concrete, no tree root issues. The intersection of Second and E Street, we're actually going to bulb out the corners, which means that the crosswalks will be shortened to make it even more safe for pedestrians to walk there and kind of slow traffic through that intersection on all 4 corners, including enhanced crosswalks. It's probably a paved or a concrete, textured concrete, scored concrete, similar to what we have at the corner of 3rd and D today. That'll be all 4 crosswalks at Second and E, and we'll finish the other 2 crosswalks at Second and D that don't exist today with the enhanced paving. And then lastly, the Class 3 bike lane. This will actually be on E Street only, but this will extend from the railroad right of way all the way north to Bonita Avenue, where we have our existing bike lanes. Do you have the funding on the next one? It's the next one, yeah. So the estimated cost for this project is roughly $3.5 million. This includes other landscape and lighting improvements outside of the corridor that we just identified, but those are still items we're working on. But this number is important because this is kind of what we're shooting for in the bonding, because we want to be able to do the project I just kind of outlined, as well as some other ones that we need to further define later on. But what I just talked about on the previous slide, we're about 2 months away from being able to go out to bid. And Bob's going to talk a little bit more about the timing of everything, but that'll be in advance of the bonding. So once the bonding is in place, we'll be able to go out to bid immediately to make sure that our estimates are correct. But the plans are about 85% completed at this time.
Any question on the projects themselves before we get into the mechanics of the financing?
I had a question. Could you explain again, what is the bulb out on the 2 slides previously? You had a bulb out on Second and E.
Sure, I don't really have an image to show you, but you'll see a lot of cities where the curb line, it's straight, parallel, and then it kind of cuts into the street on both sides. So that corner has more sidewalk space. So that crosswalk narrows down on both sides because the curb line is pushed in. So the drive lane is narrower than what it is today. So
gotcha.
On those corners, there's more room for pedestrians to stack, and it's a shorter crosswalk across the asphalt street, or in this case, the enhanced concrete that we're planning on doing. It's just a safer way for people to cross streets as well as traffic calming as well.
Great. Any other questions? Okay, Bob, you can take it from there.
Okay, thank you. All right, so that work that Eric described, as you know, was this is the detail work. It was also identified in the specific plan and in the EIFD infrastructure plan. Now it's about how do we come about paying or getting the money to do this work in advance of the EIFD generating enough ongoing revenue to support it. And as we had spoke to the PFA and the council before, the best and simplest way for that to occur is for the city to basically front the money and then the PFA to pay it back at a future date. And so this is basically the bond process. We've gone through this before, but just to remind everybody, the city would be issuing a lease revenue bond on its credit, so the city can get a better credit rating, so we'll have a lower debt service payment. The investors would buy the bonds from the city. It would be actually collateralized and secured by a piece of city property, and we'll get into the details of that on the next slide, to be able to get that favorable rate. And since it is, there's no need to validate it, since the increment that, since the EIFD will not be issuing this bond. If in the future the EIFD is to issue bonds, those will need to be validated, which is a whole nother legal process that we would need to go through. The city would then take those bond proceeds that we got, the $3.5 million, and loan them to the EIFD, the PFA, to then do this work. The PFA would then repay the city. We would set up a payment structure that fits in with the tax increment revenue that we would be receiving back at some date in the future. We would set up that payment structure so that we've got to recognize that there is this work, but there is also other work. So we don't want to lose sight of the ability for the PFA to take on those other projects as well. So the scheduled payment might be more extended out, but ultimately the city would be paid back for this issuance of a bond. The EIFD could choose at a future date to not have this ongoing obligation to the city and issue its own bond to then pay the city back. That's a whole separate approval process and would be a whole separate bond issuance, but that would be 10, 15 years into the future should they choose to do it. I couldn't see a reason why that is necessary, but nonetheless, it is still an option that would be available should the board at that time decide to do it. So that's kind of how the relationship between the city and the PFA will work to make sure that the money is there to do the work. Now, separate from that is then how does the city come about receiving those funds and the approval and the mechanics that go into that? And that's what this slide speaks to. So the city will identify, and we've roughly identified 4 pieces of property that we'll have to come back to council and say, which one of these do we want to use to secure this bond? And then that piece of property will be moved into, and the city has a separate public finance authority that has existed for years, separate from this PFA. This PFA is associated to the EIFD. The city has a Laverne Public Finance Authority where all of its bond issuances are transacted out of. It's not the city directly, it's this separate entity that exists. So this piece of property would then move to that group or that entity, which is overseen by the city as a whole. And then the finance authority would put that out as the collateral to then get a lease secured, a bond is secured. That money would then be returned to the city, which then would ultimately move it to the PFA. A lot of steps in here, I understand. And then the city would be responsible for making payment through the finance authority to the bondholders.
Right.
The city, we will make those payments, not with general fund dollars, but we'll be making those with Prop C dollars because our Prop C, which is mass transit related, these projects, since they're first mile, last mile, are eligible expenditures for those dollars. So we will be on our books carrying on a going forward basis the lease payments, the debt service obligations as part of our annual allocation for Prop C. And in a minute, I think we'll get to the numbers. I don't know if it's the next slide. No, but there are enough dollars in our annual allocation of Prop C to cover this plus additional projects. So a lot of pieces there, and I'd like to at least, can you go back to the attendees?
Oh, yeah.
I'm not going to bring in the whole team just yet, but I think for the moment, I'll bring in Dan and Larry. Sorry, I should have brought these two in earlier. And then I'll introduce you to the rest of the team before we finish this out.
Sorry, one sec.
Okay.
Stop screen.
Give me 1 minute here.
You want to just bring them
Yeah, that's fine.
Good morning.
Good morning.
To be promoted.
Yes. Welcome to the meeting. They've been following the meeting as attendees. And so I just wanted to bring the two of you in and just confirm everything that I went through fits with the process that we will take on with the PFA in the city.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. Did a very good job explaining it. Happy to answer any more detailed questions that might be on people's minds.
Yep, and I'll certainly get to those unless there's anything particular about this process right here. And I want to stop there just because there was a lot of stuff we went through.
Well, I have a question here. My concern obviously is always about the perception and communication with the public, our community. So there would be with the bond, there's no additional taxes to the public. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay,
This, the funds that will be used to pay this are with revenues we already have coming in. And because we established the EIFD district, we will be ultimately paying that back with existing property tax that is generated. It's just designated for these projects specifically.
good. Thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions? Well, you've explained it quite well then.
Thank you. All right. The next slide, thank you, is kind of an illustration of what we went through. So ultimately the bondholders are green because they're the ones that hold the dollars. So and then the Public Finance Authority, which is that city's public finance authority, is where the transactions will pass through. The blue is, of course, the city who will be paying that. The one slide that isn't here is that next panel would ultimately be to the right of that would be the EIFD, where the dollars would then be turned over to. And then then I guess we should have had a panel from there, which would be to pay for the work where the work will be paid for, and then the projects that would be taken on. So this would be the flow of how these dollars come in and then how payments get made back out. Next slide.
Okay.
So what's the price tag? And here is what we would be looking at. So the issuance, like we said, is for 3.5 for all the work we need to do, but the total issuance with the cost of issuance, the underwriting and all the other aspects is about 3.7. So to the right of that, and I don't know how well you can read it, but can you move them off of that so I can a little better? So the payment schedule you can see to the right there. The high water mark for the debt service is just over 200,000. It's 205, 206 at a certain point. And again, that would be paid out of our Prop C dollars on an annual allocation. We will need to put a project together with Metro to do this. We've already spoke to them about it and what we are looking to do, and they've given us initial approval that this is an acceptable use of those funds. But we will still need to put through that through the budget process with the city, as well as the annual Metro project list. But you can see here, we originally estimated that it was probably going to be about 250. Based on current interest rates, we're seeing it come in just over 200,000. And then ultimately the payments would need to be made, and I'll show you a slide in a minute, on the projected tax increment revenue for the EIFD. So you can kind of get a sense of when the PFA might be able to start paying some amount of this back. We'll move on to the next slide now. So this slide we've updated in the infrastructure plan and in the EIFD. We had to come up with, you'll remember, what our preliminary estimates of increment revenue that we would be generating. We have revised those, and those are pretty close to what you see here, but these reflect a little better based on our sales tax or property tax consultant with HDL, and taking the county's calculations on how they are applying the tax increment revenue, both on the county as well as the city, to come into the PFA. Because as much as you would think it would just be a simple calculation, and Bob will attest to this, nothing is actually that simple. There are a lot of nuances to the methodology. But we've been able to take what we've actually received over the last several years based on those calculations, as well as what we anticipate in new development. We've shared with you over the last couple of meetings some of the anticipated projects coming forward. Well, in that green column of the added development, those reflect to our best estimates of what the new revenue or the new assessed value will be, and then the resulting revenue that we'd be receiving into the EIFD for these projects. So you can see roughly by year 9, 20, 25, 26, we should have a reoccurring revenue source of about $1 million. So to be able to start to repay some of what the city has funded through this bond, we'll be able to start making those payments back, as well as look at issuing another bond, or start to look at the second tier of projects that we believe are important to take on. So we believe that moving forward with this, and even if things start to slide a little bit, we won't have to make payments by that point, but once we start to generate the revenue, we will be able to make payments back to the city at some point in the future. And then next we get into the timeline. Before I do, let me stop on the dollars, and then the debt service, as well as the revenue generations. Any questions there? Okay. All right. So timeline. On the left, you'll see the bullet points of what I'll call our critical marks that we want to make sure we meet. After this meeting, we will be putting together a staff report for council. Not looking for any action, just direction, but I'll still want to share this similar information, but certainly in a little more detail as it relates to the revenue bond option and what the city is going to be tasked with. The council was already given conceptual approval to move forward in that vein, but I certainly want to go back and check with them before we take on the next steps. Because after that, we really start to get into the details and start to put together the legal documents. We'll be finalizing the plans for the actual work, like Eric mentioned. We will then be returning to council for authorization. So at that point is when that action will be taken to actually issue those bonds. We will then put them to market. We will loan the proceeds to the EIFD, and then we will issue the RFP. We could move that step up to before we loan the proceeds. We need to work out those details a little bit, but once we're ready to do the RFP for solicitation of contractors, we'll do that. But once we loan the proceeds, we'll be able to award the contract or contracts depending on how we put these projects together. So then to the right is what those estimated timelines are for those milestones. So by April 4th, I may be coming to council at your next meeting if I can get the staff report done from here quick enough. But at the latest, this is built off of an April 4th going to council to get green lighted to move forward. Month of April to put together the documents. Back to the council on May 16th for that approval. Sale of bond would then be the end of May with closing the middle week of June. I'll ask Dan or Larry before I open it up to questions. Was there anything I missed in that or that you would like to highlight as well?
No, I think you did a good job. You nailed all the relevant points.
Okay.
We could bore you to death with all the minutia if you'd like, but early for that.
We'll save that for me and Eric, but unless they have compelling questions on it. Peter, did I miss anything on your end?
No, I'm fine.
Okay. Good. Any questions of the board?
I have one question. When it goes to in April 4th, your presentation, will that be in a study session or during a council meeting?
No, I'm going to make that on a council meeting. I won't require any real formal action. The only thing I will ask for is just direction. We'll have, like I said, we've already given Cosmo kind of a list of 3 or 4 properties that at a staff level we've identified. We'll come to council and ask if you have an opinion on a preference on which of these that we should look at first versus the other. We have to do title reports as part of this to ensure that there's nothing else underlying in there. I mean, we know there isn't, but it's part of the process we need to go through. So that's the only thing we may ask council for further direction on, but otherwise there's no formal action that we need at this point. I just didn't want to take on too much more additional work without at least confirming, all right, we are now pushing ahead to that next level and we will be bringing back an issuance. I didn't want you to have the action for issuing in front of you and going, oh, wait a minute, I still have some more questions. We want to be able to just streamline this from that point.
Okay, good. Any other questions? Okay.
Then before I move off of this, I'd like to bring in the rest of the team real quick, just so you can see. Cosmon has taken the lead. Cosmon has been very much involved with this board, the EIFD, even before it was created. Larry and his team helped us put together the mechanics, work through the county, do a lot of the work that was there. We really appreciated that, and his familiarity has certainly been helpful. They have been doing the lion's share of the background work for putting together the mechanics of the bond that we need to do. Danny Kim, who I mentioned, will be our bond counsel. And then Joe has been kind of the numbers guy behind the scenes for us from the beginning. And so I just wanted, and then Larry Cosmon as well as Dan, who you have already met. I just wanted to bring the team on and let the board at least be familiar with who's doing all the behind the scenes work for you, and we'll be doing the work over the next 6 to 8 weeks.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you for joining us and for all the work that you're doing.
Yeah, quick question. On the EIFD side, I believe there's some things that you have to do in terms of when bonds are issued, but we won't have to do that because it's the authority that will be issuing the bonds. Is that correct?
Yes, because in this case, it's the cooperation agreement that will be the financing. We do not need to do any steps for this particular transaction. There will be transactions in the future that when the PFA is able to stand on its own, then at that point, we will have to take on those additional steps with that bond issuance coming through the PFA directly.
From the board, are there any other questions?
Tim,
Peter, did you want to say something?
Tim has his hand raised.
No, I didn't have my hand raised. Did I?
Tim
No,
has
I'm
his hand
fine
raised.
with everything, and I have to bail out now. I have an appointment here.
Thank
So
you.
I thought that was a great presentation, and I'm really glad we're moving forward.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Peter.
Okay,
Hey, Tim?
good to see you, Rob.
Yeah, I just want to know what are we waiting for? I mean, honestly, this is the first step of many steps, but our bond rating's healthy, especially after doing a pension obligation bond. And with this to move forward, at least it's the first steps, or baby steps, but it's going to crank up very fast with the way this is going to go, especially with our station going to be complete in what, 3 to 4 years with everything else. I think I'm so glad we did this, but I mean, I appreciate all the players involved to push this, but I think we're going to have no problem selling these bonds and no problem getting this going. So, and this is the first step for beautification for our community. And thank goodness there's a lot of active transportation funds out there. So we'll be able to grab one of those and Measure C. So I think we're in a great position right now to move forward with this, with our gold line and everything else. So thanks, staff, and thanks everybody involved. Let's not waste any time.
Can't hear you, Larry.
No.
He's muted now. I see his mute.
Yeah, still no audio, Larry.
We do.
You can write it out and hold the note up.
Want to call me, Larry, and I'll put you on speaker?
Well, he's doing that. When Bob, when you said something, it triggered it regarding the process. I'm trying to remember what it was.
Okay.
You got him?
I got him. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So I just wanted to briefly say, because I'm getting feedback. Are you getting feedback or is it just me?
Well, it's probably the setup here.
Yeah. Bob, you may want to mention, this is the first EIFD in the state to have a county partnership. And you're also the first EIFD to issue debt, even though it's indirect debt. So you're furthest along in this process throughout the entire state.
Wow.
Congratulations to all of you.
Thank you, Larry. Yeah. I know what the other thing was. So as part of the cooperation agreement, and actually as part of the responsibility of the EIFD and state law, we will have to have an annual report that will come to you at your next meeting. So that will be a very important meeting for us to take an action on. We will also, I don't know if it'll be necessarily at this next meeting or at that meeting, but we'll also have to, once we do get this obligation in place, we will need to start to identify not necessarily a payment structure, but at least a running balance of what it is that the city has taken on that is the responsibility of the PFA to pay back. So it won't just be this unknown. We will be bringing that back to you as time moves on, and the cooperation agreement also requires that. So there are several steps that will be coming, just so you're aware. But those are certain things that you'll see, and that'll be new in the next meeting and maybe the one to follow. And it's just, we're still growing and maturing as the PFA. So as we start to take on these different transactions, you'll see more and more actions on your part.
Great.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate it. And we will move forward in expedient manner.
Okay. So we're going to now at this point move on to the L line and development updates.
Yes, I'll give you a brief update on this. I'm going to share screen again. I've got just a couple slides here on the L line, gold line update. The overall project is at 43% complete for the extension from Azusa to Pomona. And this is the milestones is the design is completed, the freight track relocation is almost completed, and grade crossing is about 3/4 complete. across the extension line. But specific to Laverne, these are kind of what the status of our crossings and the station platform. With the station platform to be located right approximately here on the screen, that platform construction is going to start pretty soon. And right now they're undergrounding all the utilities you can see here, but the platform itself will be starting to be constructed soon, as well as the building's been torn down where the parking lot's going to go, the 300 space parking lot. That will also start to be worked on as those plans get completed. Starting from the west side of the city, moving east, so St. Davis Canyon Road was closed previously. It'll have to be re-closed again in April through August with community notices happening. And then at Wheeler Avenue, it was closed previously with the freight line relocated in the south, the eastbound Gold Line tracks installed. The middle tracks are temporary tracks. Those will have to be redone. That's expected to happen this coming summer with a short amount of street closure there at Wheeler. At D and E, D is completed. You can see in the aerial how the concrete base is on all three tracks. So these are the permanent track crossings of the street. So no additional long-term closures will be needed at D. At Arrow, same as at Wheeler, we have the freight track in the southern Gold Line, but the middle track will have to be replaced. Also expected to happen in the summer, this coming summer. A Street and Wheeler and White are both currently closed. White's A is going to reopen on March 22nd, and White will reopen on April 30th, just in time for the LA County Fair. There will be additional closures that will be needed, especially for White Avenue, but those dates have not been identified yet. Then lastly, Fulton. This one's a little bit more complicated, mainly because of the access to the Metrolink parking lot. And this is also a crossing where we have Metrolink train tracks, unlike the other streets. And so right now, it's expected that there will be a final month-long closure later this year to finish the train track crossings there. So that's my update on the Gold Line. Any questions on the Gold L line?
No.
Okay. Yep. So just real briefly on the private development side. Well, pedestrian bridge first. I'll talk real briefly about that. I've got a meeting this afternoon on that, but it's expected that the 100% design plans for that pedestrian bridge will be completed by this August. And so that's, we're still, as Bob mentioned earlier, we're looking at all the funding opportunities. We're hopeful that we don't have to go to the EIFD to help fund any of that. But as you might recall, it was programmed as one of the projects in there. So if we're short at the end of the day, we might be coming back to the PFA to do a similar bond as what Bob's been discussing or something else at that time. But as time moves on, we'll have a clearer picture on where those dollars are going to be coming from. So with private development, again, as I mentioned before, we have several housing projects in the area that either have been entitled or in the process. We've entitled 17 units on the corner of First and White Avenue. We've also entitled 36 units on First and F Street. Those have both have been approved by the city. The one on First and White is in plan check, and the other one is not yet. Additionally, we've approved an 83,000 square foot industrial building on the White Avenue south of Arrow Highway, which is within the district. So all these projects are going to be the ones that Bob outlined in that chart that showed that future development and that property tax increment growth is based on these real projects that we're aware of. Another project that we're aware of that we might not have shared with you is the redevelopment of the Nova Pack site, the corner of Arrow Highway and White Avenue. That's a big project. That's potentially 350 units with some retail components as well, 4 stories. That application hasn't been filed, but we've been meeting with the potential developer who's in escrow to purchase the land to move forward with that development. So that's a big project, and that's that big bump you see in those projections, the financial projections of that project coming online. And then Fairplex continues to work with internally with to develop their 12 acres that's in Laverne. I have a meeting with a potential developer later this week to go over some of those things. We're still probably a month or two away from them to identifying who that might be and for the board making that decision. But we're hopeful that after that happens, that we'll have a clearer picture and can share more information about what that vision is for that 12 acres. That's all I have for the private development side. Any questions on that?
Eric, it's Ray. Are these development opportunities online with what you would have projected a year ago in terms of pace of interest?
Yeah, I would say a little bit ahead, especially the Novopac site. We honestly didn't believe that was a site that was had a potential for redevelopment anytime soon. And things change in this world, and that's a project that came out of left field for us, to be honest. And so, but it is aligned with what we expected in a specific plan. I think that's important, right? All the hard planning work that happened back 10 years ago. This is the vision that document saw as the potential here, and we're seeing the potential come true. So that's the good news.
It is. That's the end game.
Yes.
Eric, what were the 12 acres? Where's the location of that?
That's the Fairplex site on the south side of Arrow Highway.
Gotcha. Okay.
In White, basically.
I was thinking, where's those 12 acres? I'm going, wait a minute.
Giant parking lot, yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Good. Okay. Thank you, Eric, for that report.
Sure.
Very good.
Yeah, if you drive down Arrow Highway, you could see all that construction going on right there. And, next month they're supposed to start the station. So that's exciting. Okay. Eric, do we have any public comment?
We do not.
Okay. Is there any comments from the board that you'd like to make or say anything? Okay, wonderful. Then we will adjourn the meeting until June 8th, 2022 at 9 a.m. Thank you very much for joining us, everyone.
Thank you,
Thank you
everybody.
all.
Everybody.
Take care.
Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye.